Mitford Tales of Old Japan, Chapter 1, The 47 Rōnins. The books which have been written of late years about Japan have either been compiled from official records or have contained the sketchy impressions of passing travelers. Of the inner life of the Japanese, the world at large knows but little. Their religion, their superstitions, their ways of thought, the hidden springs by which they move, all these are as yet mysteries. Nor is this to be wondered at. The first Western men who came in contact with Japan, I am speaking not of the old Dutch and Portuguese traders and priests, but of the diplomatists and merchants of 11 years ago, met with a cold reception. Above all things, the native government threw obstacles in the way of any inquiry into their language, literature, and history. The fact was that the tycoon government with whom alone, so long as the Mikado remained in seclusion in his sacred capital at Kyoto, any relations were maintained, knew that the imperial purple with which they sought to invest their chief must quickly fade before the strong sunlight which would be brought upon it so soon as there should be European linguists capable of examining their books and records. No opportunity was lost of throwing dust in the eyes of the new comers, whom, even in the most trifling details, it was the official policy to lead astray. Now, however, there is no cause for concealment. The Roi fainéant has shaken off his sloth, and his mare du palais together, and an intelligible government, which need not fear scrutiny from abroad, is the result. The records of the country being but so many proofs of the Mikado title to power, there is no reason for keeping up any show of mystery. The path of inquiry is open to all, and although there is yet much to be learnt, some knowledge has been attained, in which it may interest those who stay at home to share. The recent revolution in Japan has wrought changes social as well as political, and it may be that when, in addition to the advance which has already been made, railways and telegraphs shall have connected the principal points of the land of sunrise, the old Japanese, such as he was and had been for centuries when we found him 11 short years ago, will have become extinct. It has appeared to me that no better means could be chosen of preserving a record of a curious and fast disappearing civilization than the translation of some of the most interesting national legends and histories, together with other specimens of literature bearing upon the same subject. Thus the Japanese may tell their own tale, their translator only adding here and there a few words of heading or tag to a chapter, where an explanation or amplification may seem necessary. I fear that the long and hard names will often make my tales tedious reading, but I believe that those who will bear with the difficulty will learn more of the character of the Japanese people than by skimming over descriptions of travel and adventure, however brilliant. The lord and his retainer, the warrior and the priest, the humble artisan and the despised Ada or pariah, each in his turn will become a leading character in my budget of stories. And it is out of the mouths of these personages that I hope to show forth a tolerably complete picture of Japanese society. Far away to the west loom the goblin, haunted heights of Yama, and beyond the twin hills of the Hakone Pass, Fuji. Yama, the peerless mountain, solitary and grand, stands in the center of the plain from which it sprang vomiting flames 21 centuries ago. For 160 years, the huge mountain has been at peace, but the frequent earthquakes still tell of hidden fires, and none can say when the red, hot stones and ashes may once more fall like rain over 5 provinces. In the midst of a nest of venerable trees in Takanawa, a suburb of Yedo, is hidden Sengakuji, or the Spring, Hill Temple, renowned throughout the length and breadth of the land for its cemetery, which contains the graves of the 47 Rōnins, famous in Japanese history, heroes of Japanese drama, the tale of whose deeds I am about to transcribe. On the left-hand side of the main court of the temple is a chapel, in which, surmounted by a gilt figure of Kwanien, the goddess of mercy, are enshrined the images of the 47 men, and of the master whom they loved so well. The statues are carved in wood, the faces colored, and the dresses richly lacquered. As works of art, they have great merit. The action of the heroes, each armed with his favorite weapon, being wonderfully life, like and spirited. Some are venerable men, with thin, gray hair. One is 77 years old. Others are mere boys of 16. A little further on is a stall, at which a poor old man earns a pittance by selling books, pictures, and medals, commemorating the loyalty of the 47. And higher up yet, shaded by a grove of stately trees, is a neat enclosure kept up as a signboard announces by voluntary contributions, round which are ranged 8 little tombstones, each decked with evergreens, each with its tribute of water and incense for the comfort of the departed spirit. There were 47 Rōnins. There are 48 tombstones, and the story of the 48th is truly characteristic of Japanese ideas of honor. Almost touching the rail of the graveyard is a more imposing monument under which lies buried the Lord, whose death his followers piously avenged. And now for the story. At the beginning of the 18th century, there lived a daimyo called Asano Takumi no Kami, the lord of the castle of Akko in the province of Haruma. Now it happened that an imperial ambassador from the court of the Mikado having been sent to the shogun at Yedo, Takumi no Kami and another noble called Kame-sama were appointed to receive and feast the envoy, and a high official named Kira Katsuke no Suke was named to teach them the proper ceremonies to be observed upon the occasion. The two nobles were accordingly forced to go daily to the castle to listen to the instructions of Katsuke no Suke. But this Katsuke no Suke was a man greedy of money, and as he deemed that the presents which the two daimyos, according to time-honored custom, had brought him in return for his instruction were mean and unworthy, he conceived a great hatred against them and took no pains in teaching them, but on the contrary rather sought to make laughing stocks of them. Takumi no Kami, restrained by a stern sense of duty, bore his insults with patience. But Kame-sama, who had less control over his temper, was violently incensed and determined to kill Katsuke no Suke. One night when his duties at the castle were ended, Kame-sama returned to his own palace, and having summoned his counselors to a secret conference, said to them, "Katsuke no Suke has insulted Takumi no Kami and myself during our service in attendance on the imperial envoy. This is against all decency, and I was minded to kill him on the spot. But I bethought me that if I did such a deed within the precincts of the castle, not only would my own life be forfeit, but my family and vassals would be ruined. So I stayed my hand. Still, the life of such a wretch is a sorrow to the people, and tomorrow when I go to court I will slay him. My mind is made up, and I will listen to no remonstrance." And as he spoke, his face became livid with rage. Now one of Kame-sama counselors was a man of great judgment, and when he saw from his lord manner that remonstrance would be useless, he said, "Your lordship words are law. Your servant will make all preparations accordingly. And tomorrow, when your lordship goes to court, if this Katsuke no Suke should again be insolent, let him die the death." And his lord was pleased at this speech, and waited with impatience for the day to break, that he might return to court and kill his enemy. But the counselor went home, and was sorely troubled, and thought anxiously about what his prince had said. And as he reflected, it occurred to him that since Katsuke no Suke had the reputation of being a miser, he would certainly be open to a bribe, and that it was better to pay any sum, no matter how great, than that his lord and his house should be ruined. So he collected all the money he could, and, giving it to his servants to carry, rode off in the night to Katsuke no Suke palace, and said to his retainers, "My master, who is now in attendance upon the imperial envoy, owes much thanks to my lord Katsuke no Suke, who has been at so great pains to teach him the proper ceremonies to be observed during the reception of the imperial envoy. This is but a shabby present which he has sent by me, but he hopes that his lordship will condescend to accept it, and commends himself to his lordship favor." And, with these words, he produced 1,000 ounces of silver for Katsuke no Suke, and 100 ounces to be distributed among his retainers. When the latter saw the money, their eyes sparkled with pleasure, and they were profuse in their thanks. And begging the counselor to wait a little, they went and told their master of the lordly present which had arrived with a polite message from Kame-sama. Katsuke no Suke, in eager delight, sent for the counselor into an inner chamber, and after thanking him, promised on the morrow to instruct his master carefully in all the different points of etiquette. So the counselor, seeing the miser glee, rejoiced at the success of his plan, and having taken his leave returned home in high spirits. But Kame-sama, little thinking how his vassal had propitiated his enemy, lay brooding over his vengeance, and on the following morning at daybreak went to court in solemn procession. When Katsuke no Suke met him, his manner had completely changed, and nothing could exceed his courtesy. "You have come early to court this morning, my lord Kame," said he. "I cannot sufficiently admire your zeal. I shall have the honor to call your attention to several points of etiquette today. I must beg your lordship to excuse my previous conduct, which must have seemed very rude, but I am naturally of a cross-grained disposition, so I pray you to forgive me." And as he kept on humbling himself and making fair speeches, the heart of Kame-sama was gradually softened, and he renounced his intention of killing him. Thus, by the cleverness of his counselor, was Kame-sama, with all his house, saved from ruin. Shortly after this, Takumi no Kami, who had sent no present, arrived at the castle, and Katsuke no Suke turned him into ridicule even more than before, provoking him with sneers and covert insults. But Takumi no Kami affected to ignore all this, and submitted himself patiently to Katsuke no Suke orders. This conduct, so far from producing a good effect, only made Katsuke no Suke despise him the more, until at last he said haughtily, "Here, my lord of Takumi, the ribbon of my sock has come untied. Be so good as to tie it up for me." Takumi no Kami, although burning with rage at the affront, still thought that as he was on duty he was bound to obey, and tied up the ribbon of the sock. Then Katsuke no Suke, turning from him, petulantly exclaimed, "Why, how clumsy you are! You cannot so much as tie up the ribbon of a sock properly. Anyone can see that you are a boor from the country, and know nothing of the manners of Yedo." And with a scornful laugh, he moved towards an inner room. But the patience of Takumi no Kami was exhausted. This last insult was more than he could bear. "Stop a moment, my lord," cried he. "Well, what is it?" replied the other. And as he turned round, Takumi no Kami drew his dirk and aimed a blow at his head. But Katsuke no Suke, being protected by the court cap which he wore, the wound was but a scratch, so he ran away. And Takumi no Kami, pursuing him, tried a second time to cut him down, but missing his aim, struck his dirk into a pillar. At this moment, an officer, named Kajikawa Yasobai, seeing the affray, rushed up, and holding back the infuriated noble, gave Katsuke no Suke time to make good his escape. Then there arose a great uproar and confusion, and Takumi no Kami was arrested and disarmed, and confined in one of the apartments of the palace under the care of the censors. His goods must be confiscated, and his family ruined. Such was the law. So Takumi no Kami performed hara kiri, his castle of Akko was confiscated, and his retainers having become Rōnins, some of them took service with other daimyos, and others became merchants. Now amongst these retainers was his principal counselor, a man called Oishi Kuranasuke, who, with 46 other faithful dependents, formed a league to avenge their master death by killing Katsuke no Suke. This Oishi Kuranasuke was absent at the castle of Akko at the time of the affray, which, had he been with his prince, would never have occurred. For, being a wise man, he would not have failed to propitiate Katsuke no Suke by sending him suitable presents, while the counselor who was in attendance on the prince at Yedo was a dullard, who neglected this precaution, and so caused the death of his master and the ruin of his house. So Oishi Kuranasuke and his 46 companions began to lay their plans of vengeance against Katsuke no Suke. But the latter was so well guarded by a body of men, lent to him by a daimyo called Aesugi-sama, whose daughter he had married, that they saw that the only way of attaining their end would be to throw their enemy off his guard. With this object they separated and disguised themselves, some as carpenters or craftsmen, others as merchants. And their chief, Kuronasuke, went to Kyoto and built a house in the quarter called Yamashina, where he took to frequenting houses of the worst repute and gave himself up to drunkenness and debauchery, as if nothing were further from his mind than revenge. Katsuke no Suke, in the meanwhile, suspecting that Takumi no Kami former retainers would be scheming against his life, secretly sent spies to Kyoto and caused a faithful account to be kept of all that Kuronasuke did. The latter, however, determined thoroughly to delude the enemy into a false security, went on leading a dissolute life with harlots and winebibbers. One day, as he was returning home drunk from some low haunt, he fell down in the street and went to sleep, and all the passers-by laughed him to scorn. It happened that a Satsuma man saw this and said, "Is not this Oishi Kuronasuke, who was a counselor of Asano Takumi no Kami, and who, not having the heart to avenge his lord, gives himself up to women and wine? See how he lies drunk in the public street. Faithless beast, fool and craven, unworthy the name of a samurai." And he trod on Kuronasuke's face as he slept and spat upon him. But when Katsuke no Suke's spies reported all this at Yedo, he was greatly relieved at the news and felt secure from danger. One day Kuronasuke's wife, who was bitterly grieved to see her husband lead this abandoned life, went to him and said, "My lord, you told me at first that your debauchery was but a trick to make your enemy relax in watchfulness. But indeed, this has gone too far. I pray and beseech you to put some restraint upon yourself." "Trouble me not," replied Kuronasuke, "for I will not listen to your whining. Since my way of life is displeasing to you, I will divorce you, and you may go about your business. And I will buy some pretty young girl from one of the public houses and marry her for my pleasure. I am sick of the sight of an old woman like you about the house, so get you gone the sooner the better." So saying, he flew into a violent rage, and his wife, terror-stricken, pleaded piteously for mercy. "Oh, my lord, unsay those terrible words. I have been your faithful wife for 20 years, and have borne you 3 children. In sickness and in sorrow I have been with you. You cannot be so cruel as to turn me out of doors now. Have pity, cease this useless wailing. My mind is made up, and you must go, and as the children are in my way also, you are welcome to take them with you." When she heard her husband speak thus, in her grief she sought her eldest son, Oishi Chikara, and begged him to plead for her and pray that she might be pardoned. But nothing would turn Kuronasuke from his purpose, so his wife was sent away, with the 2 younger children, and went back to her native place. But Oishi Chikara remained with his father. The spies communicated all this without fail to Katsuke no Suke, and he, when he heard how Kuronasuke, having turned his wife and children out of doors and bought a concubine, was groveling in a life of drunkenness and lust, began to think that he had no longer anything to fear from the retainers of Takumi no Kami, who must be cowards, without the courage to avenge their lord. So by degrees he began to keep a less strict watch, and sent back half of the guard which had been lent to him by his father, in law Iesugi-sama. Little did he think how he was falling into the trap laid for him by Kuronasuke, who, in his zeal to slay his lord enemy, thought nothing of divorcing his wife and sending away his children. Admirable and faithful man. Upon all of which matters, they sent regular reports to Kuronasuke. And when at last it became evident from the letters which arrived from Yedo that Katsuke no Suke was thoroughly off his guard, Kuronasuke rejoiced that the day of vengeance was at hand, and having appointed a trysting place at Yedo, he fled secretly from Kyoto, eluding the vigilance of his enemy's spies. Then the 47 men, having laid all their plans, bided their time patiently. It was now midwinter, the 12th month of the year, and the cold was bitter. One night during a heavy fall of snow, when the whole world was hushed and peaceful men were stretched in sleep upon the mats, the Rōnins determined that no more favorable opportunity could occur for carrying out their purpose. So they took counsel together, and, having divided their band into 2 parties, assigned to each man his post. One band, led by Oishi Kurenasuke, was to attack the front gate, and the other, under his son Oishi Chikara, was to attack the postern of Katsuke no Suke house. But as Chikara was only 16 years of age, Yashida Chiuzaemon was appointed to act as his guardian. Further, it was arranged that a drum, beaten at the order of Kurenasuke, should be the signal for the simultaneous attack, and that if anyone slew Katsuke no Suke and cut off his head, he should blow a shrill whistle as a signal to his comrades, who would hurry to the spot, and, having identified the head, carry it off to the temple called Sengakuji, and lay it as an offering before the tomb of their dead lord. Then they must report their deed to the government, and await the sentence of death which would surely be passed upon them. To this the Rōnins won, and all pledged themselves. Midnight was fixed upon as the hour, and the 47 comrades, having made all ready for the attack, partook of a last farewell feast together, for on the morrow they must die. Then Oishi Kurenasuke addressed the band and said, "Tonight we shall attack our enemy in his palace. His retainers will certainly resist us, and we shall be obliged to kill them. But to slay old men and women and children is a pitiful thing. Therefore, I pray you each one to take great heed lest you kill a single helpless person." His comrades all applauded this speech, and so they remained, waiting for the hour of midnight to arrive. When the appointed hour came, the Rōnins set forth. The wind howled furiously, and the driving snow beat in their faces, but little cared they for wind or snow as they hurried on their road, eager for revenge. At last they reached Katsuke no Suke house and divided themselves into 2 bands, and Chikara, with 23 men, went round to the back gate. Then 4 men, by means of a ladder of ropes which they hung on to the roof of the porch, effected an entry into the courtyard. And, as they saw signs that all the inmates of the house were asleep, they went into the porter lodge where the guards slept, and before the latter had time to recover from their astonishment, bound them. The terrified guard prayed hard for mercy, that their lives might be spared. And to this, the Rōnins agreed on condition that the keys of the gate should be given up. But the others tremblingly said that the keys were kept in the house of one of their officers, and that they had no means of obtaining them. Then the Rōnins lost patience, and with a hammer dashed in pieces the big wooden bolt which secured the gate, and the doors flew open to the right and to the left. At the same time, Chikara and his party broke in by the back gate. Then Oishi Kurenasuke sent a messenger to the neighboring houses, bearing the following message. "We, the Rōnins who were formerly in the service of Asano Takumi no Kami, are this night about to break into the palace of Katsuke no Suke to avenge our lord. As we are neither night robbers nor ruffians, no hurt will be done to the neighboring houses. We pray you to set your minds at rest. And as Katsuke no Suke was hated by his neighbors for his covetousness, they did not unite their forces to assist him. Another precaution was yet taken, lest any of the people inside should run out to call the relations of the family to the rescue, and these coming in force should interfere with the plans of the Rōnins. Kurenasuke stationed 10 of his men armed with bows on the roof of the 4 sides of the courtyard, with orders to shoot any retainers who might attempt to leave the place. Having thus laid all his plans and posted his men, Kurenasuke with his own hand beat the drum and gave the signal for attack. 10 of Katsuke no Suke retainers, hearing the noise, woke up, and drawing their swords, rushed into the front room to defend their master. At this moment, the Rōnins, who had burst open the door of the front hall, entered the same room. Then arose a furious fight between the 2 parties, in the midst of which Chikara, leading his men through the garden, broke into the back of the house. And Katsuke no Suke, in terror of his life, took refuge, with his wife and female servants, in a closet in the veranda. while the rest of his retainers, who slept in the barrack outside the house, made ready to go to the rescue. But the Rōnins, who had come in by the front door and were fighting with the 10 retainers, ended by overpowering and slaying the latter without losing one of their own number. After which, forcing their way bravely towards the back rooms, they were joined by Chikara and his men, and the two bands were united in one. By this time, the remainder of Katsuke no Suke men had come in, and the fight became general. And Kurenasuke, sitting on a camp stool, gave his orders and directed the Rōnins. Soon the inmates of the house perceived that they were no match for their enemy, so they tried to send out intelligence of their plight to Iesugi-sama, their lord father, in law, begging him to come to the rescue with all the force at his command. But the messengers were shot down by the archers whom Kurenasuke had posted on the roof. So no help coming, they fought on in despair. Then Kurenasuke cried out with a loud voice, "Katsuke no Suke alone is our enemy. Let someone go inside and bring him forth, dead or alive." Now in front of Katsuke no Suke private room stood 3 brave retainers with drawn swords. The first was Kobayashi Heihachi, the second was Waku Handeyu, and the third was Shimizu Akaku, all good men and true and expert swordsmen. So stoutly did these men lay about them that, for a while, they kept the whole of the Rōnins at bay, and at one moment even forced them back. When Oishi Kurenasuke saw this, he ground his teeth with rage and shouted to his men, "What? Did not every man of you swear to lay down his life in avenging his lord, and now are you driven back by 3 men?" Spurred by these words, Chikara seized a spear and gave battle to Waku Handeyu, but could not hold his ground, and backing by degrees, was driven out into the garden, where he missed his footing and slipped into a pond. But as Handeyu, thinking to kill him, looked down into the pond, Chikara cut his enemy in the leg and caused him to fall, and then, crawling out of the water, dispatched him. In the meanwhile, Kobayashi Heihachi and Shimizu Akaku had been killed by the other Rōnins, and of all Katsuke no Suke retainers, not one fighting man remained. Chikara, seeing this, went with his bloody sword in his hand into a back room to search for Katsuke no Suke, but he only found the son of the latter, a young lord named Kira Sahioye, who, carrying a halberd, attacked him, but was soon wounded and fled. Thus the whole of Katsuke no Suke men having been killed, there was an end of the fighting, but as yet there was no trace of Katsuke no Suke to be found. Then Kurenasuke divided his men into several parties and searched the whole house, but all in vain. Women and children weeping were alone to be seen. At this, the 47 men began to lose heart in regret that after all their toil they had allowed their enemy to escape them, and there was a moment when in their despair they agreed to commit suicide together upon the spot, but they determined to make one more effort. So Kurenasuke went into Katsuke no Suke's sleeping room and, touching the quilt with his hands, exclaimed, "I have just felt the bed, clothes, and they are yet warm, and so methinks that our enemy is not far off. He must certainly be hidden somewhere in the house." Greatly excited by this, the Rōnins renewed their search. Now in the raised part of the room, near the place of honor, there was a picture hanging. Taking down this picture, they saw that there was a large hole in the plastered wall, and on thrusting a spear in they could feel nothing beyond it. So one of the Rōnins, called Yazama Jiyutaro, got into the hole and found that on the other side there was a little courtyard, in which there stood an outhouse for holding charcoal and firewood. Looking into the outhouse, he spied something white at the further end, at which he struck with his spear, when 2 armed men sprang out upon him and tried to cut him down. But he kept them back until one of his comrades came up and killed one of the 2 men and engaged the other, while Jiyutaro entered the outhouse and felt about with his spear. Again seeing something white, he struck it with his lance, when a cry of pain betrayed that it was a man. So he rushed up, and the man in white clothes, who had been wounded in the thigh, drew a dirk and aimed a blow at him. But Jiyutaro wrested the dirk from him, and clutching him by the collar, dragged him out of the outhouse. Then the other Rōnin came up, and they examined the prisoner attentively and saw that he was a noble-looking man, some 60 years of age, dressed in a white satin sleeping robe which was stained by the blood from the thigh wound which Gyutaro had inflicted. The two men felt convinced that this was no other than Katsuke no Suke, and they asked him his name, but he gave no answer, so they gave the signal whistle, and all their comrades collected together at the call. Then Oishi Kurenasuke, bringing a lantern, scanned the old man features, and it was indeed Katsuke no Suke. And if further proof were wanting, he still bore a scar on his forehead where their master, Asano Takumi no Kami, had wounded him during the affray in the castle. There being no possibility of mistake, therefore, Oishi Kurenasuke went down on his knees, and addressing the old man very respectfully, said, "My lord, we are the retainers of Asano Takumi no Kami. Last year your lordship and our master quarreled in the palace, and our master was sentenced to hara kiri, and his family was ruined. We have come tonight to avenge him, as is the duty of faithful and loyal men. I pray your lordship to acknowledge the justice of our purpose. And now, my lord, we beseech you to perform hara kiri. I myself shall have the honor to act as your second, and when, with all humility, I shall have received your lordship head, it is my intention to lay it as an offering upon the grave of Asano Takumi no Kami." Thus, in consideration of the high rank of Katsuke no Suke, the Rōnins treated him with the greatest courtesy, and over again entreated him to perform hara kiri. But he crouched speechless and trembling. At last Kurenasuke, seeing that it was vain to urge him to die the death of a nobleman, forced him down, and cut off his head with the same dirk with which Asano Takumi no Kami had killed himself. Then the 47 comrades, elated at having accomplished their design, placed the head in a bucket and prepared to depart. But before leaving the house, they carefully extinguished all the lights and fires in the place, lest by any accident a fire should break out and the neighbors suffer. As they were on their way to Takanawa, the suburb in which the temple called Sengakuji stands, the day broke, and the people flocked out to see the 47 men who, with their clothes and arms all blood-stained, presented a terrible appearance, and everyone praised them, wondering at their valor and faithfulness. But they expected every moment that Katsuke no Suke father-in-law would attack them and carry off the head, and made ready to die bravely sword in hand. However, they reached Takanawa in safety, for Matsudera Akino Kami, one of the 18 chief daimyos of Japan, of whose house Asano Takumi no Kami had been a cadet, had been highly pleased when he heard of the last night work, and he had made ready to assist the Rōnins in case they were attacked. So Katsuke no Suke father-in-law dared not pursue them. So the counselor went out and said to Oishi Kurenasuke, "Sir, I am a counselor of the Prince of Sendai, and my master bids me beg you, as you must be worn out after all you have undergone, to come in and partake of such poor refreshment as we can offer you. This is my message to you from my lord." "I thank you, sir," replied Kurenasuke. "It is very good of his lordship to trouble himself to think of us. We shall accept his kindness gratefully." So the 47 Rōnins went into the palace and were feasted with gruel and wine, and all the retainers of the Prince of Sendai came and praised them. Then Kurenasuke turned to the counselor and said, "Sir, we are truly indebted to you for this kind hospitality, but as we have still to hurry to Sengakuji, we must needs humbly take our leave." And, after returning many thanks to their hosts, they left the palace of the Prince of Sendai and hastened to Sengakuji, where they were met by the abbot of the monastery, who went to the front gate to receive them, and led them to the tomb of Takumi no Kami. And when they came to their lord grave, they took the head of Katsuke no Suke, and having washed it clean in a well hard by, laid it as an offering before the tomb. When they had done this, they engaged the priests of the temple to come and read prayers while they burnt incense. First Oishi Kurenasuke burnt incense, and then his son Oishi Chikara, and after them the other 45 men performed the same ceremony. Then Kurenasuke, having given all the money that he had by him to the abbot, said, "When we 40 7 men shall have performed hara kiri. I beg you to bury us decently. I rely upon your kindness. This is but a trifle that I have to offer. Such as it is, let it be spent in masses for our souls." And the abbot, marveling at the faithful courage of the men, with tears in his eyes pledged himself to fulfill their wishes. So the 47 Rōnins, with their minds at rest, waited patiently until they should receive the orders of the government. When the sentence had been read, the 47 Rōnins were divided into 4 parties and handed over to the safekeeping of 4 different daimyos. And sheriffs were sent to the palaces of those daimyos in whose presence the Rōnins were made to perform hara kiri. But as from the very beginning they had all made up their minds that to this end they must come, they met their death nobly. And their corpses were carried to Sengakuji and buried in front of the tomb of their master, Asano Takumi no Kami. And when the fame of this became noised abroad, the people flocked to pray at the graves of these faithful men. Among those who came to pray was a Satsuma man, who, prostrating himself before the grave of Oishi Kuranasuke, said, "When I saw you lying drunk by the roadside at Yamashina, in Kyoto, I knew not that you were plotting to avenge your lord. And thinking you to be a faithless man, I trampled on you and spat in your face as I passed. And now I have come to ask pardon and offer atonement for the insult of last year." With those words, he prostrated himself again before the grave, and drawing a dirk from his girdle, stabbed himself in the belly and died. And the chief priest of the temple, taking pity upon him, buried him by the side of the Rōnins, and his tomb still remains to be seen with those of the 47 comrades. This is the end of the story of the 47 Rōnins. Mitford Tales of Old Japan, Chapter 2, The Loves of Gompachi and Komurasaki. Within 2 miles or so of Yedo, and yet removed from the toil and din of the great city, stands the village of Meguro. Beyond the outskirts, the road that leads thither is flanked on either side by woodlands teeming with an endless variety of foliage, broken at intervals by the long, low line of villages and hamlets. As we draw near Meguro, the scenery, growing more and more rustic, increases in beauty. Deep shady lanes, bordered by hedgerows as luxuriant as any in England, lead down into a valley of rice, fields bright with the emerald green of the young crops. To right and left rise knolls of fantastic shape, crowned with a profusion of cryptomerias, Scotch firs and other cone, bearing trees, and fringed by thickets of feathery bamboos, their stems bending gracefully to the light summer breeze. Wherever a spot is pleasanter and shadier than the rest, there may be seen the red portal of a shrine which the simple piety of the country folk has raised to Inari Sama, the patron god of farming, or to some other tutelary deity of the place. At the eastern outlet of the valley, a strip of blue sea bounds the horizon. Toward the west lie the distant mountains. In the foreground, before a snug farmhouse with its velvety, brown thatch, a troop of sturdy urchins, suntanned and stark naked, frisk in the wildest gambols, heedless of the scolding voice of the withered old grandam who sits spinning and minding the house, while her son and his wife toil away at some outdoor labor. Close at our feet runs a stream of pure water, in which a group of countrymen wash the vegetables that they will presently shoulder and carry off to sell by auction in the suburbs of Yedo. Not the least beauty of the scene consists in the wondrous clearness of an atmosphere so transparent that the most distant outlines are scarcely dimmed, while the details of the nearer ground stand out in sharp, bold relief, now lit by the rays of a vertical sun, now darkened under the flying shadows cast by the fleecy clouds which sail across the sky. Under such a heaven, what painter could limn the lights and shades that flit over the woods, the pride of Japan, whether in late autumn, when the russets and yellows of our own trees mingle with the deep crimson glow of the maples, or in spring, when plum and cherry trees and wild camellias, giants 50 feet high, are in full blossom. All that we see is enchanting, yet there is a strange stillness in the groves. seldom does the song of a bird break the silence. Indeed, I know but one warbler whose note has any music in it, the yuguisu, by some enthusiasts called the Japanese nightingale, at best, a king in the kingdom of the blind. The scarcity of animal life of all descriptions, man and mosquitoes excepted, is a standing wonder to the traveler. The sportsman must toil many a weary mile to get a shot at boar or deer or pheasant, and the plow of the farmer and the trap of the poacher, who works in and out of season, threaten to exterminate all wild creatures. Unless, indeed, the government should, as they threatened in the spring of 1869, put in force some adaptation of European game laws. But they are lukewarm in the matter. A little hawking on a duck pond satisfies the cravings of the modern Japanese sportsman, who knows that game, laws or no game, laws, the wild fowl will never fail in winter. And the days are long past when my lord the shogun used to ride forth with a mighty company to the wild places about Mount Fuji, there camping out and hunting the boar, the deer, and the wolf, believing that in so doing he was fostering a manly and military spirit in the land. There is one serious drawback to the enjoyment of the beauties of the Japanese country, and that is the intolerable affront continually offered to one's sense of smell. The whole of what should form the sewerage of the city is carried out on the backs of men and horses, to be thrown upon the fields. And if you would avoid the overpowering nuisance, you must walk handkerchief in hand, ready to shut out the stench which assails you at every moment. It would seem natural, while writing of the Japanese country, to say a few words about the peasantry, their relation to the lord of the soil, and their government. But these I must reserve for another place. At present our dealings are with the pretty village of Meguro. At the bottom of a little lane, close to the entrance of the village, stands an old shrine of the Shinto, the form of hero, worship which existed in Japan before the introduction of Confucianism or of Buddhism, surrounded by lofty cryptomerias. The trees around a Shinto shrine are specially under the protection of the god to whom the altar is dedicated, and in connection with them, there is a kind of magic still respected by the superstitious, which recalls the waxen dolls, through the medium of which sorcerers of the Middle Ages in Europe, and indeed those of ancient Greece, as Theocritus tells us, pretended to kill the enemies of their clients. This is called Ushi no Toki Mari, or going to worship at the hour of the ox, and is practiced by jealous women who wish to be revenged upon their faithless lovers. In her left hand, she carries a small straw figure, the effigy of the lover who has abandoned her, and in her right she grasps a hammer and nails, with which she fastens the figure to one of the sacred trees that surround the shrine. There she prays for the death of the traitor, vowing that, if her petition be heard, she will herself pull out the nails which now offend the god by wounding the mystic tree. Night after night she comes to the shrine, and each night she drives in 2 or more nails, believing that every nail will shorten her lover life, for the god, to save his tree, will surely strike him dead. Meguro is one of the many places round Yedo to which the good citizens flock for purposes convivial or religious, or both. Hence it is that, cheek by jowl with the old shrines and temples, you will find many a pretty tea house, standing at the rival doors of which Mademoiselle Sugar, Wave of the Sea, Flower, Seashore, and Chrysanthemum are pressing in their invitations to you to enter and rest. Not beautiful these damsels, if judged by our standard, but the charm of Japanese women lies in their manner and dainty little ways, and the tea house girl, being a professional decoy. Duck is an adept in the art of flirting en tout by en tout Hanor, be it remembered. For she is not to be confounded with the frail beauties of the Yashiwara, nor even with her sisterhood near the ports open to foreigners and to their corrupting influence. For, strange as it seems, our contact all over the East has an evil effect upon the natives. In one of the tea houses, a thriving trade is carried on in the sale of wooden tablets, some 6 inches square, adorned with the picture of a pink cuttlefish on a bright blue ground. These are ex-votos, destined to be offered up at the temple of Yakushi Niurai, the Buddhist Aesculapius, which stands opposite, and concerning the foundation of which the following legend is told. In the days of old, there was a priest called Jikaku, who at the age of 40 years, it being the autumn of the 10th year of the period called Tensho, AD 833, was suffering from disease of the eyes, which had attacked him 3 years before. In order to be healed from this disease, he carved a figure of Yakushi Nirai, to which he used to offer up his prayers. 5 years later, he went to China, taking with him the figure as his guardian saint, and at a place called Kertsu, it protected him from robbers and wild beasts and from other calamities. There he passed his time in studying the sacred laws, both hidden and revealed, and after 9 years set sail to return to Japan. When he was on the high seas, a storm arose, and a great fish attacked and tried to swamp the ship, so that the rudder and mast were broken, and the nearest shore being that of a land inhabited by devils, to retreat or to advance was equally dangerous. The commands of the saints must be obeyed. So with tears in his eyes, the priest threw into the sea the sacred image which he loved. Then did the wind abate, and the waves were stilled, and the ship sailed on as though drawn by unseen hands until she reached a safe haven. In the 10th month of the same year, the priest again set sail, trusting to the power of his patron saint, and reached the harbor of Tsukushi without mishap. For 3 years he prayed that the image which he had cast away might be restored to him, until at last one night he was warned in a dream that on the sea shore at Matsura Yakushi Nirai would appear to him. In consequence of this dream, he went to the province of Hizen and landed on the sea shore at Hirado, where, in the midst of a blaze of light, the image which he had carved appeared to him twice, riding on the back of a cuttlefish. Thus was the image restored to the world by a miracle. In commemoration of his recovery from the disease of the eyes and of his preservation from the dangers of the sea, that these things might be known to all posterity, the priest established the worship of Tako Yakushi Nirai of the cuttlefish, and came to Meguro, where he built the temple of Fudo-sama, another Buddhist divinity. At this time, there was an epidemic of pox in the village, so that men fell down and died in the street, and the holy man prayed to Fudo-sama that the plague might be stayed. Then the god appeared to him and said, "The saint Yakushi Nirai of the cuttlefish, whose image thou carriest, desires to have his place in this village, and he will heal this plague. Thou shalt therefore raise a temple to him here, that not only this pox, but other diseases for future generations may be cured by his power." Hearing this, the priest shed tears of gratitude, and having chosen a piece of fine wood, carved a large figure of his patron saint of the cuttlefish, and placed the smaller image inside the larger, and laid it up in this temple, to which people still flock that they may be healed of their diseases. Such is the story of the miracle, translated from a small, ill-printed pamphlet sold by the priests of the temple, all the decorations of which, even to a bronze lantern in the middle of the yard, are in the form of a cuttlefish, the sacred emblem of the place. What pleasanter lounge in which to while away a hot day could a man wish for than the shade of the trees borne by the hill on which stands the temple of Fudo-sama? 2 jets of pure water springing from the rock are voided by spouts carved in the shape of dragons into a stone basin enclosed by rails, within which it is written that no woman may enter. If you are in luck, you may cool yourself by watching some devotee, naked save his loin cloth, performing the ceremony called sujio, that is to say, praying under the waterfall that his soul may be purified through his body. In winter, it requires no small pluck to undergo this penance, yet I have seen a penitent submit to it for more than a quarter of an hour on a bitterly cold day in January. In summer, on the other hand, the religious exercise called hyakudo, or the 100 times, which may also be seen here to advantage, is no small trial of patience. It consists in walking backwards and forwards 100 times between 2 points within the sacred precincts, repeating a prayer each time. At this temple, the place allotted for the ceremony is between a grotesque bronze figure of Tengu-sama, the dog of heaven, the terror of children, a most hideous monster with a gigantic nose, which it is beneficial to rub with a finger afterwards to be applied to one's own nose, and a large brown box inscribed with the characters Hyaku-do in high relief, which may generally be seen full of straw tallies. It is no sinecure to be a good Buddhist, for the gods are not lightly to be propitiated. Prayer and fasting, mortification of the flesh, abstinence from wine, from women, and from favorite dishes are the only passports to rising in office, prosperity in trade, recovery from sickness, or a happy marriage with a beloved maiden. Nor will mere faith without works be efficient. A votive tablet of proportionate value to the favor prayed for, or a sum of money for the repairs of the shrine or temple, is necessary to win the favor of the gods. Poorer persons will cut off the queue of their hair and offer that up. And at Horinouchi, a temple in great renown some 8 or 9 miles from Yedo, there is a rope about 2.5 inches in diameter and about 6 fathoms long, entirely made of human hair so given to the gods. It lies coiled up, dirty, moth-eaten, and uncared for at one end of a long shed full of tablets and pictures, by the side of a rude native fire engine. The taking of life being displeasing to Buddha, outside many of the temple's old women and children earn a livelihood by selling sparrows, small eels, carp, and tortoises, which the worshipper sets free in honor of the deity, within whose territory cocks and hens and doves, tame and unharmed, perch on every jutty, frieze, buttress, and coigny of vantage. But of all the marvelous customs that I know of in connection with Japanese religious exercises, none appears to me so strange as that of spitting at the images of the gods, more especially at the statues of the Nai, O circumflex, the 2 huge red and green statues which, like Gog and Magog, emblems of strength, stand as guardians of the chief Buddhist temples. The figures are protected by a network of iron wire, through which the votaries, praying the while, spit pieces of paper, which they had chewed up into a pulp. If the pellet sticks to the statue, the omen is favorable. If it falls, the prayer is not accepted. The inside of the great bell at the Tycoon burial ground, and almost every holy statue throughout the country, are all covered with these outspittings from pious mouths. Through all this discourse about temples and tea houses, I am coming by degrees to the goal of our pilgrimage to old stones, moldering away in a rank, overgrown graveyard hard by, an old burying ground, forgotten by all save those who love to dig out the tales of the past. The key is kept by a ghoulish old dame, almost as time, worn and mildewed as the tomb over which she watches. Obedient to our call, and looking forward to a fee 10 times greater than any native would give her, she hobbles out, and opening the gate, points out the stone bearing the inscription, the tomb of the Shioku, fabulous birds which, living one within the other, a mysterious duality contained in one body, are the emblem of connubial love and fidelity. By this stone stands another, graven with a longer legend, which runs as follows. In the old days of Genroku, she pined for the beauty of her lover, who was as fair to look upon as the flowers, and now beneath the moss of this old tombstone all has perished of her save her name. Amid the changes of a fitful world, this tomb is decaying under the dew and rain, gradually crumbling beneath its own dust. Its outline alone remains. Stranger, bestow an alms to preserve this stone, and we, sparing neither pain nor labor, will second you with all our hearts. Erecting it again, let us preserve it from decay for future generations, and let us write the following verse upon it. These 2 birds, beautiful as the cherry blossoms, perished before their time, like flowers broken down by the wind before they have borne seed. Under the first stone is the dust of Gompachi, robber and murderer, mixed with that of his true love Komurasaki, who lies buried with him. Her sorrows and constancy have hallowed the place, and pious people still come to burn incense and lay flowers before the grave. How she loved him even in death may be seen from the following old world story. About 230 years ago, there lived in the service of a daimyo of the province of Inaba a young man, called Shurai Gompachi, who, when he was but 16 years of age, had already won a name for his personal beauty and valor, and for his skill in the use of arms. Now it happened that one day a dog belonging to him fought with another dog belonging to a fellow clansman, and the two masters, being both passionate youths, disputing as to whose dog had the best of the fight, quarreled and came to blows, and Gompachi slew his adversary. And in consequence of this, he was obliged to flee from his country and make his escape to Yedo. And so Gompachi set out on his travels. One night, weary and footsore, he entered what appeared to him to be a roadside inn, ordered some refreshment, and went to bed, little thinking of the danger that menaced him. For as luck would have it, this inn turned out to be the trysting place of a gang of robbers, into whose clutches he had thus unwittingly fallen. To be sure, Gompachi's purse was but scantily furnished, but his sword and dirk were worth some 300 ounces of silver, and upon these the robbers, of whom there were 10, had cast envious eyes, and had determined to kill the owner for their sake. But he, all unsuspicious, slept on in fancied security. In the middle of the night, he was startled from his deep slumbers by someone stealthily opening the sliding door which led into his room, and rousing himself with an effort, he beheld a beautiful young girl, 15 years of age, who, making signs to him not to stir, came up to his bedside, and said to him in a whisper, "Sir, the master of this house is the chief of a gang of robbers, who have been plotting to murder you this night for the sake of your clothes and your sword. As for me, I am the daughter of a rich merchant in Mikawa. Last year the robbers came to our house, and carried off my father's treasure and myself. I pray you, sir, take me with you, and let us fly from this dreadful place." She wept as she spoke, and Gompachi was at first too much startled to answer. But being a youth of high courage and a cunning fencer to boot, he soon recovered his presence of mind, and determined to kill the robbers and to deliver the girl out of their hands. So he replied, "Since you say so, I will kill these thieves and rescue you this very night. Only do you, when I begin the fight, run outside the house, that you may be out of harm's way, and remain in hiding until I join you." Upon this understanding, the maiden left him and went her way. But he lay awake, holding his breath and watching, and when the thieves crept noiselessly into the room, where they supposed him to be fast asleep, he cut down the first man that entered and stretched him dead at his feet. The other 9, seeing this, laid about them with their drawn swords, but Gompachi, fighting with desperation, mastered them at last and slew them. After thus ridding himself of his enemies, he went outside the house and called to the girl, who came running to his side, and joyfully traveled on with him to Mikawa, where her father dwelt. And when they reached Mikawa, he took the maiden to the old man house, and told him how, when he had fallen among thieves, his daughter had come to him in his hour of peril, and saved him out of her great pity, and how he, in return, rescuing her from her servitude, had brought her back to her home. When the old folks saw their daughter whom they had lost restored to them, they were beside themselves with joy, and shed tears for very happiness. And in their gratitude, they pressed Gompachi to remain with them, and they prepared feasts for him and entertained him hospitably. But their daughter, who had fallen in love with him for his beauty and knightly valor, spent her days in thinking of him, and of him alone. And the old merchant, seeing that he would not be turned from his purpose, gave him a parting gift of 200 ounces of silver, and sorrowfully bade him farewell. But alas for the grief of the maiden, who sat sobbing her heart out and mourning over her lover departure. He, all the while thinking more of ambition than of love, went to her and comforted her and said, "Dry your eyes, sweetheart, and weep no more, for I shall soon come back to you. Do you, in the meanwhile, be faithful and true to me, and tend your parents with filial piety." So she wiped away her tears and smiled again, when she heard him promise that he would soon return to her. And Gompachi went his way, and in due time came near to Yedo. But his dangers were not yet over. For late one night, arriving at a place called Suzugamori in the neighborhood of Yedo, he fell in with 6 highwaymen who attacked him, thinking to make short work of killing and robbing him. Nothing daunted, he drew his sword and dispatched 2 out of the 6. But being weary and worn out with his long journey, he was sorely pressed, and the struggle was going hard with him, when a wardsman who happened to pass that way riding in a chair, seeing the affray, jumped down from his chair and drawing his dirk came to the rescue, and between them they put the robbers to flight. Now it turned out that this kind tradesman, who had so happily come to the assistance of Gompachi, was no other than Chobai of Banzuin, the chief of the Otokodate, or Friendly Society of the Wardsmen of Yedo, a man famous in the annals of the city, whose life, exploits, and adventures are recited to this day, and form the subject of another tale. When the highwayman had disappeared, Gompachi, turning to his deliverer, said, "I know not who you may be, sir, but I have to thank you for rescuing me from a great danger." And as he proceeded to express his gratitude, Chobai replied, "I am but a poor wardsman, a humble man in my way, sir, and if the robbers ran away, it was more by good luck than owing to any merit of mine. But I am filled with admiration at the way you fought. You displayed a courage and a skill that were beyond your years, sir." "Indeed," said the young man, smiling with pleasure at hearing himself praised. "I am still young and inexperienced and am quite ashamed of my bungling style of fencing. And now may I ask you, sir, whither you are bound? That is almost more than I know myself, for I am a Rōnin and have no fixed purpose in view." "That is a bad job," said Chobai, who felt pity for the lad. "However, if you will excuse my boldness in making such an offer, being but a wardsman, until you shall have taken service, I would fain place my poor house at your disposal." Gompachi accepted the offer of his new but trusty friend with thanks, so Chobai led him to his house, where he lodged him and hospitably entertained him for some months. And now Gompachi, being idle and having nothing to care for, fell into bad ways and began to lead a dissolute life, thinking of nothing but gratifying his whims and passions. He took to frequenting the Yashiwara, the quarter of the town which is set aside for tea, houses, and other haunts of wild young men, where his handsome face and figure attracted attention, and soon made him a great favorite with all the beauties of the neighborhood. About this time, men began to speak loud in praise of the charms of Komurasaki, or Little Purple, a young girl who had recently come to the Yashiwara, and who in beauty and accomplishments outshone all her rivals. Gompachi, like the rest of the world, heard so much of her fame that he determined to go to the house where she dwelt, at the sign of the 3 sea coasts, and judge for himself whether she deserved all that men said of her. Accordingly, he set out one day, and having arrived at the 3 sea coasts, asked to see Komurasaki, and being shown into the room where she was sitting, advanced towards her. But when their eyes met, they both started back with a cry of astonishment, for this Komurasaki, the famous beauty of the Yashiwara, proved to be the very girl whom several months before Gompachi had rescued from the robber's den and restored to her parents in Mikawa. He had left her in prosperity and affluence, the darling child of a rich father, when they had exchanged vows of love and fidelity, and now they met in a common stew in Yedo. What a change, what a contrast. How had the riches turned to rust, the vows to lies? "What is this?" cried Gompachi when he had recovered from his surprise. "How is it that I find you here pursuing this vile calling, in the Yashiwara? Pray explain this to me, for there is some mystery beneath all this which I do not understand." But Komurasaki, who, having thus unexpectedly fallen in with her lover that she had yearned for, was divided between joy and shame, answered weeping, "Alas, my tale is a sad one and would be long to tell. After you left us last year, calamity and reverses fell upon our house, and when my parents became poverty-stricken, I was at my wits' end to know how to support them. So I sold this wretched body of mine to the master of this house and sent the money to my father and mother. But in spite of this, troubles and misfortunes multiplied upon them, and now, at last, they have died of misery and grief. And oh, lives there in this wide world so unhappy a wretch as I. But now that I have met you again, you who are so strong, help me who am weak. You saved me once, do not, I implore you, desert me now." And as she told her piteous tale, the tears streamed from her eyes. "This is, indeed, a sad story," replied Gompachi, much affected by the recital. "There must have been a wonderful run of bad luck to bring such misfortune upon your house, which, but a little while ago, I recollect so prosperous. However, mourn no more, for I will not forsake you. It is true that I am too poor to redeem you from your servitude, but at any rate, I will contrive so that you shall be tormented no more. Love me, therefore, and put your trust in me." When she heard him speak so kindly, she was comforted, and wept no more, but poured out her whole heart to him, and forgot her past sorrows in the great joy of meeting him again. When it became time for them to separate, he embraced her tenderly and returned to Chobai House. But he could not banish Komurasaki from his mind, and all day long he thought of her alone. And so it came about that he went daily to the Yashiwara to see her, and if any accident detained him, she, missing the accustomed visit, would become anxious and write to him to inquire the cause of his absence. At last, pursuing this course of life, his stock of money ran short, and as, being a Rōnin and without any fixed employment, he had no means of renewing his supplies, he was ashamed of showing himself penniless at the 3 sea coasts. Then it was that a wicked spirit arose within him, and he went out and murdered a man, and having robbed him of his money, carried it to the Yashiwara. From bad to worse is an easy step, and the tiger that has once tasted blood is dangerous. Blinded and infatuated by his excessive love, Gompachi kept on slaying and robbing, so that, while his outer man was fair to look upon, the heart within him was that of a hideous devil. At last his friend Chobai could no longer endure the sight of him, and turned him out of his house. And as, sooner or later, virtue and vice meet with their reward, it came to pass that Gompachi crimes became notorious, and the government having set spies upon his track, he was caught red-handed and arrested. And his evil deeds having been fully proved against him, he was carried off to the execution ground at Suzugamori, the Bell Grove, and beheaded as a common malefactor. Now when Gompachi was dead, Chobai's old affection for the young man returned, and being a kind and pious man, he went and claimed his body and head, and buried him at Meguro, in the grounds of the temple called Boranji. When Komurasaki heard the people at Yashiwara gossiping about her lover end, her grief knew no bounds, so she fled secretly from the 3 sea coasts, and came to Meguro and threw herself upon the newly made grave. Long she prayed, and bitterly she wept over the tomb of him whom, with all his faults, she had loved so well. And then, drawing a dagger from her girdle, she plunged it in her breast and died. The priests of the temple, when they saw what had happened, wondered greatly and were astonished at the loving faithfulness of this beautiful girl, and taking compassion on her, they laid her side by side with Gompachi in one grave, and over the grave they placed a stone which remains to this day, bearing the inscription, "The Tomb of the Shioku." And still the people of Yedo visit the place, and still they praise the beauty of Gompachi and the filial piety and fidelity of Komurasaki. Let us linger for a moment longer in the old graveyard. The word which I have translated a few lines above as loving faithfulness means literally chastity. When Komurasaki sold herself to supply the wants of her ruined parents, she was not, according to her lights, forfeiting her claim to virtue. On the contrary, she could perform no greater act of filial piety, and so far from incurring reproach among her people, her self-sacrifice would be worthy of all praise in their eyes. This idea has led to grave misunderstanding abroad, and indeed no phase of Japanese life has been so misrepresented as this. I have heard it stated, and seen it printed, that it is no disgrace for a respectable Japanese to sell his daughter, that men of position and family often choose their wives from such places as the 3 sea coasts, and that up to the time of her marriage, the conduct of a young girl is a matter of no importance whatever. Nothing could be more unjust or more untrue. It is only the neediest people that sell their children to be waitresses, singers, or prostitutes. It does occasionally happen that the daughter of a samurai, or gentleman, is found in a house of ill fame, but such a case could only occur at the death or utter ruin of the parents, and an official investigation of the matter has proved it to be so exceptional, that the presence of a young lady in such a place is an enormous attraction, her superior education and accomplishments shedding a luster over the house. As for gentlemen marrying women of bad character, are not such things known in Europe? Do ladies of the demi-monde never make good marriages? Mésalliances are far rarer in Japan than with us. Certainly among the lowest class of the population, such marriages may occasionally occur, for it often happens that a woman can lay by a tempting dowry out of her wretched earnings, but amongst the gentry of the country they are unknown. And yet a girl is not disgraced if for her parents' sake she sells herself to a life of misery so great, that, when a Japanese enters a house of ill fame, he is forced to leave his sword and dirk at the door for two reasons. First, to prevent brawling. Secondly, because it is known that some of the women inside so loathe their existence that they would put an end to it, could they get hold of a weapon. It is a curious fact that in all the daimyo castle towns, with the exception of some which are also seaports, open prostitution is strictly forbidden, although, if report speaks truly, public morality rather suffers than gains by the prohibition. The misapprehension which exists upon the subject of prostitution in Japan may be accounted for by the fact that foreign writers, basing their judgment upon the vice of the open ports, have not hesitated to pronounce the Japanese women unchaste. As fairly might a Japanese, writing about England, argue from the street, walkers of Portsmouth or Plymouth to the wives, sisters, and daughters of these very authors. In some respects, the gulf fixed between virtue and vice in Japan is even greater than in England. The Eastern courtesan is confined to a certain quarter of the town and distinguished by a peculiarly gaudy costume, and by a dress which consists of a forest of light tortoiseshell hair, pins stuck round her head like a saint glory, a glory of shame which a modest woman would sooner die than wear. Vice jostling virtue in the public places, virtue imitating the fashions set by vice, and buying trinkets or furniture at the sale of vice effects, these are social phenomena which the East knows not. The custom prevalent among the lower orders of bathing in public bath, houses without distinction of the sexes, is another circumstance which has tended to spread abroad very false notions upon the subject of the chastity of the Japanese women. Every traveler is shocked by it, and every writer finds in it matter for a page of pungent description. Certainly there is far less indecency and immorality resulting from this public bathing than from the promiscuous herding together of all sexes and ages, which disgraces our own lodging, houses in the great cities, and the hideous hovels in which some of our laborers have to pass their lives. Nor can it be said that there is more confusion of sexes amongst the lowest orders in Japan than in Europe. Speaking upon the subject once with a Japanese gentleman, I observed that we considered it an act of indecency for men and women to wash together. But during a residence of 3 years and a half, in which time I crossed and recrossed every part of the great city at all hours of the day, I never once saw such a sight. I believe myself that it can only be seen at certain hot mineral springs in remote country districts. The best answer to the general charge of immorality which has been brought against the Japanese women during their period of unmarried life lies in the fact that every man who can afford to do so keeps the maidens of his family closely guarded in the strictest seclusion. The daughter of poverty, indeed, must work and go abroad, but not a man is allowed to approach the daughter of a gentleman. And she is taught that if by accident any insult should be offered to her, the knife which she carries at her girdle is meant for use, and not merely as a badge of her rank. Not long ago, a tragedy took place in the house of one of the chief nobles in Yedo. One of my Lady Tyre, women, herself a damsel of gentle blood, and gifted with rare beauty, had attracted the attention of a retainer in the palace, who fell desperately in love with her. For a long time, the strict rules of decorum by which she was hedged in prevented him from declaring his passion. But at last, he contrived to gain access to her presence, and so far forgot himself, that she, drawing her poniard, stabbed him in the eye, so that he was carried off fainting, and presently died. The girl declaration that the dead man had attempted to insult her was held to be sufficient justification of her deed, and instead of being blamed, she was praised and extolled for her valor and chastity. As the affair had taken place within the 4 walls of a powerful noble, There was no official investigation into the matter, with which the authorities of the palace were competent to deal. The truth of this story was vouched for by 2 or 3 persons whose word I have no reason to doubt, and who had themselves been mixed up in it. I can bear witness that it is in complete harmony with Japanese ideas, and certainly it seems more just that Lucretia should kill Tarquin than herself. The better the Japanese people come to be known and understood, the more, I am certain, will it be felt that a great injustice has been done them in the sweeping attacks which have been made upon their women. Writers are agreed, I believe, that their matrons are, as a rule, without reproach. If their maidens are chaste, as I contend that from very force of circumstances they cannot help being, what becomes of all these charges of vice and immodesty? Do they not rather recoil upon the accusers, who would appear to have studied the Japanese woman only in the harlot of Yokohama? Having said so much, I will now try to give some account of the famous Yashiwara of Yedo, to which frequent allusion will have to be made in the course of these tales. At the end of the 16th century, the courtesans of Yedo lived in 3 special places. These were the street called Koji, Machai, in which dwelt the women who came from Kyoto, the Kamakura Street, and a spot opposite the Great Bridge, in which last 2 places lived women brought from Suruga. Besides these, there afterwards came women from Fushimi and from Nara, who lodged scattered here and there throughout the town. His petition was granted in the year 1617, and he fixed upon a place called Fukiyacho, which on account of the quantities of rushes which grew there was named Yoshi, Wara, or the Rush Moor, a name which now, a days by a play upon the word Yoshi, is written with 2 Chinese characters, signifying the good or lucky moor. The place was divided into 4 streets, called the Yedo Street, the 2nd Yedo Street, the Kyoto Street, and the 2nd Kyoto Street. In the 8th month of the year 1655, when Yedo was beginning to increase in size and importance, the Yashiwara, preserving its name, was transplanted bodily to the spot which it now occupies at the northern end of the town. And the streets in it were named after the places from which the greater number of their inhabitants originally came, as the Sakai Street, the Fushimi Street, and C, who rots away her life in the common stews. These figures do not, however, represent the whole of the prostitution of Yedo. The Yashiwara is the chief, but not the only, abiding place of the public women. At Fukagawa there is another flower district, built upon the same principle as the Yashiwara, while at Shinagawa, Shinjuku, Itabashi, Senji, and Kadzukapara, the hotels contain women who, nominally only waitresses, are in reality prostitutes. There are also women called Jigoku, Amna, or Hell, women who, without being born on the books of any brothel, live in their own houses and ply their trade in secret. On the whole, I believe the amount of prostitution in Yedo to be wonderfully small, considering the vast size of the city. There are 394 tea houses in the Yashiwara, which are largely used as places of assignation, and which on those occasions are paid, not by the visitors frequenting them, but by the keepers of the brothels. It is also the fashion to give dinners and drinking parties at these houses, for which the services of taikamachi, or jesters, among whom there are 39 chief celebrities, and of singing and dancing girls, are retained. The guide to the Yashiwara gives a list of 55 famous singing girls, besides a host of minor stars. These women are not to be confounded with the courtesans. Their conduct is very closely watched by their masters, and they always go out to parties in couples or in bands, so that they may be a check upon one another. Doubtless, however, in spite of all precautions, the shower of gold does from time to time find its way to Dana Elap, and to be the favored lover of a fashionable singer or dancer is rather a feather in the cap of a fast young Japanese gentleman. The fee paid to singing girls for performing during a space of 2 hours is 1 shilling and 4 pence each. For 6 hours the fee is quadrupled, and it is customary to give the girls a hana, or present, for themselves, besides their regular pay, which goes to the master of the troupe to which they belong. Courtesans, singing women, and dancers are bought by contractors, either as children, when they are educated for their calling, or at a more advanced age, when their accomplishments and charms render them desirable investments. The engagement is never made long, for once past the flower of their youth, the poor creatures would be mere burthens upon their masters. A courtesan is usually bought until she shall have reached the age of 27, after which she becomes her own property. Singers remain longer in harness, but even they rarely work after the age of 30. For Japanese women, like Italians, age quickly, and have none of that intermediate stage between youth and old age, which seems to be confined to countries where there is a twilight. Children destined to be trained as singers are usually bought when they are 5 or 6 years old, a likely child fetching from about 35 to 50 shillings. The purchaser undertakes the education of his charge and brings the little thing up as his own child. The parents sign a paper absolving him from all responsibility in case of sickness or accident, but they know that their child will be well treated and cared for, the interests of the buyer being their material guarantee. Girls of 15 or upwards who are sufficiently accomplished to join a company of singers fetch 10 times the price paid for children, for in their case, there is no risk and no expense of education. Little children who are bought for purposes of prostitution at the age of 5 or 6 years fetch about the same price as those that are bought to be singers. During their novitiate, they are employed to wait upon the warin, or fashionable courtesans, in the capacity of little female pages, kamuro. They are mostly the children of distressed persons, or orphans, whom their relatives cruelly sell rather than be at the expense and trouble of bringing them up. Of the girls who enter the profession later in life, some are orphans who have no other means of earning a livelihood. Others sell their bodies out of filial piety, that they may succor their sick or needy parents. Others are married women who enter the yashiwara to supply the wants of their husbands, and a very small proportion is recruited from girls who have been seduced and abandoned, perhaps sold, by faithless lovers. The time to see the yashiwara to the best advantage is just after nightfall, when the lamps are lighted. Then it is that the women, who for the last 2 hours have been engaged in gilding their lips and painting their eyebrows black, and their throats and bosoms a snowy white, carefully leaving 3 brown dyke collar points where the back of the head joins the neck, in accordance with one of the strictest rules of Japanese cosmetic science, leave the back rooms, and take their places, side by side, in a kind of long, narrow cage, the wooden bars of which open on to the public thoroughfare. Here they sit for hours, gorgeous in dresses of silk and gold and silver embroidery, speechless and motionless as wax figures, until they shall have attracted the attention of some of the passers-by who begin to throng the place. At Yokohama, indeed, and at the other open ports, the women of the yashiwara are loud in their invitations to visitors, frequently relieving the monotony of their own language by some blasphemous term of endearment picked up from British and American seamen. But in the flower district at Yedo, and wherever Japanese customs are untainted, the utmost decorum prevails. Although the shape which vice takes is ugly enough, still it has this merit, that it is unobtrusive. Never need the pure be contaminated by contact with the impure. He who goes to the yashiwara goes there knowing full well what he will find, but the virtuous man may live through his life without having this kind of vice forced upon his sight. Here again do the open ports contrast unfavorably with other places. Yokohama at night is as leprous a place as the London Haymarket. A public woman or singer on entering her profession assumes a nom de guerre, by which she is known until her engagement is at an end. Some of these names are so pretty and quaint that I will take a few specimens from the Yashiwara Seiken, the guidebook upon which this notice is based. Little Pine, Little Butterfly, Brightness of the Flowers, the Jewel River, Gold Mountain, Pearl Harp, the Stork that lives 1,000 years, Village of Flowers, Sea Beach, The little dragon, little purple, silver, chrysanthemum, waterfall, white brightness, forest of cherries, these and a host of other quaint conceits are the one prettiness of a very foul place.